Book 101 is all about the bookstore ride for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest, a former $10 billion fund manager, exposing the truth about our economic system. And of course, an author too, and the author of the book, Capital Offense, no other than Mr. Paul Musson.
Hello, Daniel. Great
Welcome,
to be here.
welcome. Yes, welcome,
Thank you.
welcome, Mr. Paul on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Yeah, so I was a professional investor for my career, around 30 years, over 30 years. And yeah, equities investor. Loved my job, had a great job, but I grew increasingly frustrated over the years witnessing what policymakers were doing to the economy. And so communication became my great passion. And so I would write to my clients who were financial advisors across the country. And in my quarterly reports, explain things from my perspective. And I got a lot of good feedback over the years for my straightforward approach and the way I would communicate in that I would not communicate in intimidating ways. I would use easy to understand terminology because my goal was always to empower people with the truth and with understanding. And when you do that, you put people in a much better position to make informed decisions for their clients. And so I wanted to write a book about what I saw was going on and helping people understand why they were struggling, why the cost of living was getting more expensive, why some people in the world seem to be doing much better than they are, despite the fact that they work just as hard and are just as well educated. And it's hard for people to connect the dots in terms of um, monetary policy and how it impacts their lives. So I decided to write this book, Capital Offense: Why Some Benefit at Your Expense. And it's again written in very easy to understand terms, chapter by chapter. I use lots of analogies and stories. So if you read the book, you will understand what's going on. And the goal of the book is not a book about retribution. It's a book about truth, understanding. And it's only when people truly understand what's happening will they be in a position to demand better decision making from our policymakers. And policymakers are good people, excuse me, but for the last 30 years we've been demanding of them something that is not good, which in the short term feels good, but in the long term does a lot of harm to many people. And yeah, and so I have my blog. It's a free weekly blog called Political Economy. It's on my website. And yeah, it's just a weekly update of what's going on in the world, again, in very easy to understand terms. And just helping people to understand what's going on. So that's become my great passion.
Indeed, a passion, truly, truly empowering. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come, Mr. Paul, and tell us the title meaning the phrase Capital One is a powerful pun. Beyond the wordplay, what is the fundamental offense or injustice that your work exposes?
Yeah, yes. So one of the key issues is that a lot of people, and a lot of policymakers for that matter, don't understand the difference between capital and money. So, capital is what makes the world go round. Capital is anything that you produce, it could be a good or a service. So you have your podcast, you're creating capital through your podcast that other people consume. And so the example I give is so if you make bikes and I make suits, if you make a bike, you've just created capital. I make a suit, I've created capital. And then we fairly exchange the bike for the suit. So now you've got a suit, I've got a bike. We both have capital, and it didn't come at the expense of anybody else. That's the way the free market is supposed to work, that you only benefit if somebody else has benefited from your efforts, a free exchange of capital. But we don't do direct exchange. We don't, if you make a bike and I make a suit, we don't do a direct exchange. What we do is we sell those products for money, and then we use our money to go buy the product. So you would sell your bike for, let's say, $1,000. It's a nice bike. Then you'd use your $1,000 to buy a nice suit from me. So let's say that you make 10 bikes and you sell them for $1,000 each. So you've got $10,000 in your bank account. That $10,000, what that represents is the 10 bikes that you made. Right? So your 10 bikes are effectively stored up in that $10,000. Your $10,000 is holding capital of 10 bikes. But if before you get a chance to spend your $10,000, the central bank doubles the money supply, that newly printed money was just printed out of thin air. The central bank did not create any capital to obtain that money. That new money only obtains capital when it comes into circulation and extracts capital from the rest of the money already in circulation. So as soon as the central bank doubles the money supply, it takes 5 of the bikes from your $10,000 and puts it into the newly printed money. So your bank account says you still have $10,000, but your $10,000 now is only storing 5 bikes instead of 10. So your $10,000 will now only buy half as much as it would have done before the central bank doubled the money supply. So when they increase the money supply, they extract capital from the citizenry without their permission. And that's why it's called capital offense.
Interesting, interesting indeed, Mr. Paul. Thus, your argument suggests that the modern economy is inherently a zero sum game, where wealth for some is necessarily extracted from others.
Yeah, so there is still a lot of good things going on in the economy, a lot of capital being created by a lot of smart, hardworking people. But increasingly, you have a part of the economy that is only making money at the expense of somebody else. And this is enabled primarily by central banks. And the most, it happens in stock markets, big time. There's a lot of good things going on in stock markets, but there's a lot of bad things going on as well. But the easiest example to understand is how people make money at the expense of somebody else through housing. So this started in earnest back in 2001 in the US when the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank in the US, decided to create a what they call a wealth effect. And that was to drive housing prices higher so people would feel wealthier and then borrow money on their home and go out and spend it. And the policymakers think that would be good for the economy. And so when they drive housing prices higher, it's a wealth transfer. None of us should be making money on our home. So I live in a suburb of Toronto in Mississauga, and our home is worth 4 times what we paid for it back in 2001. But like earlier, when I was talking about you make a bike, I make a suit, we exchange that capital. So the capital I have is a reflection of the capital that I produced, and now you have. I benefited somebody else, you benefited somebody else. If I make 4 times on my home, what was my contribution to society? Who out there has 4 times the amount of capital that I now have? Nobody. I didn't create any capital. There's no justification for me making 4 times on my home. My home is not a productive asset. It's not producing 4 times as much stuff. It hasn't increased 4 times in size. It hasn't relocated to some glorious seaside location. It's the same economic good. I only make 4 times on my home because central banks drove interest rates down to zero to explicitly drive housing prices higher. So when a young couple or a newcomer to Canada buys my house, all it is a redistribution of wealth from them to me, from their bank account into my bank account. So when you look down on society, capital did not increase. It's still the same house. It's just what you have to pay for it is 4 times more. I benefit at the expense of other people. And that is not the way the system is supposed to work. It's an unfair system. I think it's an immoral system. And it is literally ruining the lives of millions of young people in Canada, Australia, and now in the US.
Mr. Paul, what is the primary mechanism? Is it policy, financialization, monopolistic practices, or something else that allows the systemic transfer of value to occur?
Yeah. So I think it's not a conspiracy theory. I think it is actually good intentions gone bad. So policymakers have convinced themselves that driving asset prices higher is good for the economy. It's not. If stock markets are rising as a result of companies taking capital and putting it to productive use and creating more capital, hiring more people, paying them more, profits going up, all that creative activity, capital, pushes up the share price. And if you have hundreds or thousands of companies that are all doing that, then that's going to push the stock market higher. So the stock market is going higher because the economy is becoming more productive. That's a good thing. So what central banks decided to do was, instead of establishing the conditions for the most optimal allocation of capital, of productive capital, they decided to instead drive the stock market higher first to try and pull the economy up with the stock market. It doesn't work. It results in misallocation of capital, and it results in lower productivity growth in the economy because to to drive stock markets higher, they push interest rates down to zero, and then they print money. All these things harm the productive capacity of the economy. Now, in the short term, it looks like they are successful in driving asset prices higher, but you can't see the harm to the economy for a number of years. And then, so over time, you have declining productivity growth, you have growing deficits and debt, and then you get people who are increasingly angry because they can see that some are benefiting significantly from it while they are struggling. And so central banks have effectively painted themselves into a corner, and by extension, all of us, because their policies didn't work. And whenever stock markets started to come down to reflect reality, central banks would come roaring back in, printing more money to drive stock prices higher again, which does even more harm to the economy. So they have sacrificed, in my opinion, the health of the economy on the altar of higher asset prices. And of course, it's the ultra wealthy who own most of the assets. And I've got some stats here. See if I can find it. Um, where are we? Yeah, so net worth. This is in the States. The top 10% of people in the States own 67% of the total net worth, and the bottom 50% only own 2%. And so there should be wealth disparity that's based on efforts and ability and success. But the wealth disparity has grown to grotesque levels. And much of that disparity or the wealth, not all of it, but much of it, is not a result of efforts, is not a result of ability or success. It's a result of central banks taking interest rates down to zero, printing money, and explicitly driving asset prices higher. And it benefits some at the expense of everybody else.
Mr. Paul, in what ways are our economy or economic and financial system designed with rules that inherently benefit for capital owners over laborers, insiders over outsiders?
Um, that is not. I mean, it's an important subject. It's not really the subject of my book. Um, I think there's nothing wrong with the capitalist system. There's just a lot wrong with some of the participants. And, there are a lot of great businesses out there that treat their employees extremely well and share with their employees the success of the business. Unfortunately, there are a lot of companies that don't do that. And you'll see these companies that are run by what I call career executives. There are a lot of good career executives. There are a lot of not good career executives. And so you will see if a big company, a new CEO comes in, and one of the first things they'll do is fire about 3,000 employees to cut
Yeah.
costs and increase profitability. They will diminish the customer value proposition for whatever product or service it is that they offer to their customers. They might increase the price without increasing the quality to drive sales higher. All these things come at the expense of the employees, at the expense of the customer. Short term, it can drive your stock price higher, and then the executives can cash in on their options and make a lot of money. But longer term, it's not good for the business. For a business to thrive over time and for that to be sustainable, it's very important that all the constituents benefit from the business model. And there are six constituents. There is owners, shareholders, senior executives, there's the employees, suppliers to that business, the community at large, and finally, and most importantly, the customer. So all six need to be benefiting from this business model. And if they're not, then this business model in this shape will not persist. It won't continue. And the customer is the most important constituent because the customer is the only one out of all six that pays. The other five take. So the example I give in my book, I give a couple examples, but one example is a company called Fastenal. It's based in Minnesota. And they distribute fasteners, screws, pretty basic business. But we had a plant tour a long time ago. And the plant manager was so excited about the business, like he loved the company. And all the employees are all excited. So I asked him, say, why do you all love the company so much? And he said, well, it's management, it's ownership. They really respect us. They like us. They listen to what we have to say. and we all make a lot of money. We all share in the success of the business. The better the company does, the better the employees do. And then he gave me an example. The founder of the business was the CEO, so entrepreneur, and he owned about a third of the company. His wife had passed away some years prior, and when she had a good stake in the company as well. And after she passed away, the CEO took all of her shares and he distributed them to all the employees in the company. That's good capitalism at work, right? That's the way it's supposed to be, where everybody shares in the success of the business. And there are a lot more companies out there than you think there are. A lot of really good things happening. Unfortunately, um, there's also a lot of the opposite going on. And this is not good for the economy, longer term for sure. And it builds resentment naturally, rightfully so. And so, yeah, I guess that's how I would, answer your question. Like it's not the system, it's the people. And you can choose to decide how you want to behave in this system. And doing the right thing, I think, longer term is in your own self interest, you know. But a lot of people don't see it that way, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes, it is. And Mr. Paul, how would a more equitable system that rewards actual value creator over value extraction need to be structured?
So I think the first thing you need to do is stop central banks from bailing out bad behavior in stock markets. And they've been doing this for a long time. Because when they bail out the bad behavior by taking interest rates down to the economy distorting zero level, or when they print money to buy assets and drive those stock prices higher, it bails out the bad behavior and then results in even more of that. It encourages more of the very same bad behavior. And so people in Wall Street and companies who make reckless decisions need to know, and the owners of those businesses need to know, that if they make bad decisions, they're not going to be bailed out by central banks that, as I said earlier, when they print money, they distort the capital allocation function of the economy. And so they make people worse off in the economy than they otherwise would have been. But they don't, it's not that they don't care. I think they've convinced themselves that it's not their fault. And as long as they see asset prices growing higher. So that would be the first step, is stop bailing out bad behavior. The next step would be, again, related to central banks, stop growing the money supply at such a fast rate. There are some who believe the money supply shouldn't grow at all. I believe it was the great classical economist David Ricardo back in the 1800s. He said that the correct amount of money in the economy is whatever it is at this moment. Just don't ever change it, up or down. People like Milton Friedman, the great monetarist economist, believed that the money supply should increase at a steady rate, 3 to 5% per year or something like that. That wouldn't be too bad. But the money supply has been growing much, much quicker than that over the last 30, 40, 50 years. So, and then, stop distorting interest rates below their natural rate. A natural rate is that rate determined by people such as yourself, such as me, anybody, any company, anybody who has skin in the game, their own capital that they have worked to create. And if they want to invest their capital, they're going to lend their capital, they're going to determine what sort of interest rate they should get from the person that they're lending the money to based on the risk profile of that person or that business. So if it's a riskier business, if you're more worried about getting paid back, you're going to demand a higher interest rate. And if it's a more secure loan, then you demand a lower interest rate. When you have millions of people making these risk assessments, then you end up with a natural rate of interest, which is here, which results in the most productive economy. Central banks drive what they target is what's called a neutral rate. A neutral rate is a rate that keeps the economy going without causing inflation. And they've encouraged debt-fueled consumption for many years. There's nothing wrong with debt if it's taken on to buy productive assets. But if you're taking on debt to consume, then you're not giving yourself the wherewithal to pay that debt back over time. And so they lower interest rates to allow people to take on more and more debt to spend more and more. But every time they lower the interest rate, they're taking it further and further below this natural rate, which is the rate that results in the most productive economy. So you're moving further and further from the optimal allocation of capital. So they need to stop manipulating interest rates. And there are I have 10 steps at the end of my book that I think would lead to a more productive economy, and a fairer distribution of the wealth that's being produced, i.e., the wealth distribution would be based on efforts and results rather than central banks manipulating asset prices higher.
Very interesting answer, Mr. Paul. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season. And my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in third season. And Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in fourth season. And Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Paul, if you could leave the audience with one key piece of awareness to help them to see how this system operates in their own lives, what would it be?
I think I would recommend that one of the big issues is policymakers and some economists have convinced politicians and others that you can get something for nothing. You cannot. If you have received something and you did not work for it or contribute in some way, then it has come at somebody else's expense. And so if we all stop believing in this something for nothing fairy tale, keeping it real, then I think people's eyes would open up. We don't want to, a lot of people my age, I'm 63, so I've made a fortune on my house, but it will just go to our daughters so they can afford an overly priced home. But some people, when I tell them this, they don't want to believe it. They want to convince themselves that somehow they deserve to make money on their home. And I understand
Mm-mm.
why they feel that way, but it's not true, right? So that's what I would leave people with.
Yes, Mr. Paul Musson. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support Capital Offense, your advocacy, or any projects that you're doing right now?
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so I have my website, Paddington Capital Management, and it's mgmtmanagement.com, where you can find my free blog, the weekly blog called Political Economy. I've got videos there, interviews, book summary. And yeah, you can sign up for my free blog and check out my book on Amazon or Thrift Books Barnes and Noble or Indigo. You can buy it online.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Paul Musson, because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come, more and more empowering advocacy to come. So, Mr. Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Daniel. It was a lot of fun.
More to come, people. See you soon.